I'm not an activist. I don't see myself as an environmentalist. My professional interest in decarbonization is not the environment. I see it as a hugely interesting legal challenge. There was a time when idealism had a place. The Greta Thunberg approach, right? You raise awareness. What you need now is for the idealists to retreat and let the experts do what they do best in their narrow areas. Keep your differences, by all means kill each other, but for this one, do something together and you will both make money.
Meet Harris Zografakis, partner at law firm Stephenson Harwood, co-ordinator for the Blue Visby Consortium. He's also chair of Comité Maritime International. What strikes me about Harris is his pragmatic approach towards maritime decarbonization. He's not trying to appeal to the goodness of our heart. He's also not trying to rely on the mandate from a high authority. Instead, he's looking at the problem as it is, from his own unique vantage point, the one of a maritime lawyer. And by doing so, he's able to reuse an ancient legal principle to solve a problem that will get us 80% there: how to reduce the carbon footprint of ocean passages. But I disagree with Harris. He's not merely a lawyer, as he likes to claim. He also has all the makings to be a great engineer. Maybe in the parallel universe, instead of going to London to attend a lawyers' conference, he went to Paris and attended a lecture at Académie des Sciences. I'm sure as an engineer, his contribution to decarbonization would have been even more consequential. I hope you enjoy our conversation as much as I did.
To get us started, I'd like to go back to your career. So as I understand, you've spent more than 30 years in maritime and international trade law. You've handled everything from arbitration to very complex oil and gas disputes. So first off, what drew you to the maritime law initially? And how did your career evolve over time to decarbonization?
Well, people might think that because of my surname and because of my accent, because I'm originally from Greece, people might assume that somehow I come from a shipping family or a maritime law family, but I do not. So I have nothing to do with shipping until I fell into this. There is a particular point in time that I can trace that defined my professional trajectory. I was a law student, and for some reason, I developed an interest in a particular event and a conference that was taking place. It was 1990 or 1991. It was a conference in London on EU law, or at the time, EC law, European Community law, and maritime transport. And I signed up. I got a very good discount because I was a student. And I found myself in London in the environment of maritime lawyers, or in fact, London maritime lawyers. And I was completely taken aback. I had never come across such depth of knowledge, and the debates, the sessions, the panels, everything was absolutely top class. It blew my mind completely. And also being in the company amongst professionals, City of London professionals, I thought this is one to do when I grow up. From that point onwards, I developed a deeper interest in maritime law. I pursued a postgraduate degree in the UK, in Southampton, on maritime law and also competition law, which was still an interest of mine. So it can all be traced back to that conference. It was almost like a turning point in my life. If I hadn't attended, then I would have been something very different, and I don't think I would have ended up in London at all. So for those who hesitate whether or not to attend the conference, I think sometimes there can be quite turning points in one's life.
What struck you in the conference? The speaker, the theme?
The speakers were some of the deepest experts in the field. I remember one of the speakers was Lord Britton, who was, I think he's now dead. He was a barrister by education, by profession, who became the UK commissioner in the European Union. Other speakers that I can't remember, but they were all deep experts, and they were all very able to communicate difficult points of law in an area that was very hot at the time. But it was also the experience of being there. Imagine I was a 21-year-old student, and I found myself holding a cup of coffee with people who were double my age, 3 times my age, and they were all accomplished people in the dark suits. Yeah. When I was growing up in Greece, people only wore dark suits in funerals. It's the uniform of the City of London. Well, it all changed, but we were all in dark suits, right, in the city. And it was the first time I saw so many people wearing dark suits. I didn't have a suit at the time. So I was wearing my student outfit. So yes, that was what brought me. That was what made me think I want to pursue maritime law, and more specifically, do that in London.
I see. I think it's probably also the fact that it's not just in theory, it's connected to real problem. When I was a 20-year-old, and I have a similar event where I had a lunch with a bunch of partners from McKinsey, and you have this American partner telling of the deal that he's having, and I was like a very poor student. He's telling me how he's structuring the deal. That just blew my mind. I think probably very similar experience, right? You see, it's not just in theory, but it's actually the application of this has very big, deep impact for many, many businesses.
Absolutely right. And of course, studying in Athens University, the curriculum, the topics, the way the topics were taught was academic. So being in a company in the environment of practical application was completely new to me.
In your career, right, you've dealt with many companies, right? The mining companies, some oil and gas, they probably didn't have the best impact on the environment, or at least the large audience would think they don't have that as much impact, right? But now you actually are completely switching gear where you very focus on decarbonization. How would you relate with those people who people consider as very big polluter, and how you think your experience can help push for decarbonization?
Some of my colleagues at the office think I'm sometimes think I'm an activist, but I'm not an activist. I don't see myself as an activist. I don't see myself as an environmentalist. I am interested as a citizen, but my professional interest in decarbonization is not the environment, if you like. It's not the activism part at all. I see decarbonization, and we would need to define what that is, but I see that thing that we call decarbonization, I see it as a hugely interesting legal challenge. There's obviously a very important political challenge, a very important technological challenge, but what attracts me to this as a lawyer, because that's what I am, right? I'm not an engineer, I'm not a policy guy. I'm a commercial lawyer, I'm a contracts lawyer. So what attracts me to this is that it's a huge contractual legal challenge. So I see it as a problem to be solved, as a legal problem. Now, my area of expertise is the purchase, sale, and transportation of raw commodities, what we call maritime trade. That's all I know. And I'm trying to apply what I know, that's the only thing I know, in the effort to decarbonize, and maybe this is where I should try to define it as I see it. So what exactly is it that we mean by decarbonization? And in reality, we mean two different things, completely different things. One is the energy transition, the quest for a new fuel, a new source of energy. And on top of that, in parallel with that, there's something completely different, which is the need to reduce emissions today or within a certain timescale. In both of those areas, when it comes to maritime, when it comes to trade, both of those areas, law, contracts are very, very important. I would argue they're as important as policy, which is something completely different. They're not as important as technology. So engineers are more important than lawyers, but it is still very, very important. So that's what attracts me to the area. It is not saving the environment. It is resolving a very, very difficult problem, or rather within a constellation of problems, look at those that are of a legal nature and see what you can do about it. So in that sense, I look at my role very narrowly. I'm not interested so much or at all in the policy. I leave the policy in the hands of politicians and lobbyists. I'm very interested in technology. I like it, but that's not my area of expertise. And you see, that's another thing I would perhaps say, is that because we have difficulty in defining decarbonization, and sometimes we avoid defining it, we become lazy in our discussions. So everybody has an opinion about everything. And I often find myself saying, well, but look, I'm not an expert in this. I don't have an opinion. I want the experts to tell me. We see that a lot with the discussions around the IMO. Everybody has become an expert in the IMO. And if you ask any lawyer will tell you, well, but this is really difficult. public international law. This is really difficult. But all of a sudden, everybody's an expert. And of course, nobody is an expert. Very few people are.
I can totally relate to what you're saying, because I think there are some people who are idealists. So let's say there's two strands. There's the idealist decarbonization folks. And to some degree, it's unless we achieve this target that may not be achievable, then everybody else, you're doing nothing. It's as if you're doing nothing. And then I think the way you approach it, similar to, I think, how I like to think about problem is, at the end of the day, it's not about decarbonization, it's about solving a business problem. And then if you put the right milestone that's achievable, then the key thing is what do we do to hopefully achieve those milestones? And then your expertise is balancing the incentive between the market participants using law. My expertise to look at from a technology perspective, from a design and consortium perspective, how do we try to use the data technology to be able to achieve this? But in the end, I think we are both sitting more from a practical aspect rather than something that feels better, potentially say, hey, we want to achieve this very, very hard goal, but who knows, maybe nobody can ever achieve it. And I think that I agree with you. There's too much of that in the market.
We are both, I think, in terms of our background, we are both of a practical background, but also commercial business background. And these are business challenges. I know we've only just started, but if I may say something provocative on this, there was a time when idealism and generalisms had a place because you raise awareness, right? You shout from the rooftops. It may be that what you say is not exactly right, but you raise awareness. It's like the Greta Thunberg approach, right? You raise awareness, but we are now done with that. You don't need to raise awareness anymore. What you need now is for the idealists to retreat, get out of the way, and let the experts do what they do best in their narrow areas. So the policy aspect is today, in my opinion, counterproductive. Yeah, we cannot forever be complaining about the policy. It's like a full-time job. You can spend 25 years, you can spend a career complaining about policy. But what we need today is results. And results mean business, expertise, and it means also accepting that we will decarbonize, whichever way you look at it, whether it's energy transition or it is efficiency, we will decarbonize the world we have, the industry we have, not some other universe that we wish we lived in. And that's very much, I think the priority should be the priority today for all of us.
Yeah. I think there's a meme in theater on Twitter. It's do not complain about the game, but play the game we're living in, right? So a follow up on this one. It is true that the maritime industry is really steep in tradition, right? So a lot of the process, I won't say for hundreds of years, but they are just way things have been done for many, many years, right? And however, what you're trying to do is really push for something quite different, even with just the contract side. So how do you maintain the optimism doing this? How do you think about changing this when you know that people typically don't want to change because it's very, very traditional?
I love the question, and I would answer it from the end. Optimism. Let's forget about that. You're an engineer, or if there's part of you who's an engineer. I'm a lawyer. Engineers and lawyers don't do optimism or pessimism. So we deal with a problem as we have it. Our job is to analyze the problem, to split it up into its constituent elements, whether we are engineers or lawyers, and try to address the issues. Now, optimism doesn't help, or pessimism doesn't help. You should try to do professionally and diligently the best you can do in the given circumstances. You know, it's a little bit like saying, think of a major geopolitical issue. Think of a war. Say, are you optimistic about ending this war? Well, I don't know, but let's look at the 100 problems we have to fix, and maybe if we fix the 100 problems, maybe the war will end. So am I optimistic? No. Am I pessimistic? No. I don't care about optimism or pessimism. I care about the problems and what we can do, what I can do about it as a professional. Now, the conservatism and change, I don't believe in change for the sake of change. So the way I see it is that the world is changing because it does. The environment changes, the conditions change. What I'm trying to say to those who listen to me is that we have to adapt to the changing circumstances. So if you look at the initiatives I'm involved in, they're not about imposing change. They're about adapting to change that is here anyway. So I think it's a mistake to expect that people or businesses will change out of choice. Industries change, or companies change, or people change by adapting,
Yeah.
by the need to adapt. If you remove the need to adapt, nobody changes.
I
So,
love this. Yeah.
yeah.
No, I love this characterization because because I think when you try to convince people to change, you have to give them ROI and blah, blah, blah. But at the end of the day, you're right. People fundamentally don't want to change unless it's such a massive thing. They have no choice. It's a tsunami coming, and if they do nothing, they're going to die. That's absolutely correct. I think I love that way of thinking about it.
And even then, even if there's a tsunami coming, there will be many people who will not rush for the hills. But by expecting that people will change for the good of the planet or for some other reason, they won't. Even if conditions change, many will not change. So that's the key, is how do you adapt? Now, contract law, taking all of this back to lawyers, right? English law is the law of choice in maritime trade. English law has a very peculiar feature, perhaps, that is very adaptable. The parties, the willing participants, the contracting parties can agree whatever they like. The law will not interfere. So that adaptability has allowed English maritime law, which is the law of choice in maritime trade, to adapt, to change, simply because the conditions change. Of course, that's a much bigger discussion, but that is how change, in my view, takes place. It's just an adaptation process.
Actually, this week we speak with Sarah Green, which is law commissioner of UK law. So I think that's a point we talked to her about. But I totally agree. I think my understanding is that that's a fundamental difference between common law and civil law, like a French system, which is very prescriptive what needs to happen. And common law is like, yes, you guys figure out. You can change. And if you give precedents, that's how we resolve it.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right.
Yeah. Okay, let's dive straight into the solution that I think you are probably the best known for, which is the Blue Visby solution. You've been very vocal pushing for it. Let's first explain what the problem is trying to solve, right? Which is a sail fast and wait. As a practice, this accounts roughly, I think, for 20% of the shipping's carbon footprint for those bulk shippers. Can you first explain from a business perspective why this approach is so entrenched in this market?
It's entertaining to look at the way we describe this. So we say sail fast, then wait, or we say steam fast, then wait. Because it's a practice that goes back to the earliest times of seafaring. Go back 100 years or 1,000 years. Going out to sea was the most dangerous thing anybody could do. Whether you use the wind or you use oars or you use engines. So it was absolutely natural. The obvious thing to do would be to get as fast as you can to where you want to be and in the protection, in the sheltered waters of a port, of an anchorage. So it is deep in the DNA of seafaring. Nobody would extend the time at sea unless there's a reason to do it.
Yeah.
That's sort of at the highest level. Now, let's look at the technology a little bit. We are so used to a modern world, and we forget how soon things that we take for granted, how recent they are. When I started my career 30 years ago, ships did not have the data type of Inmarsat. So ships had Inmarsat, satellite communications for voice. There was a thing called Inmarsat C, which was data, low and so on and so forth. Not all ships had it. So until, I don't know, the late 1990s, it was not entirely possible to know where exactly the ship was in the oceans, where she was going, what the conditions were. Think about this. It's very new that you have on your iPhone marine traffic or whatever, and you play to see what is the yacht you see out at sea. So this lack of knowledge was only resolved in the last few decades. Therefore, today, we cannot justify the practice by looking at technology. The technology exists for ships to be organized in their ocean voyages perfectly. So imagine air traffic control. Air traffic control, with very few exceptions, is globally coordinated, and it looks perfect, even though we all know it's not perfect. Otherwise, we wouldn't be waiting at airports. But in theory, it's technologically perfect. We don't have that for shipping. The reason is not technological. The reason is business, contracts, the architecture of the trade. So now we're going a little bit deeper. The structural reason vessels sail fast and wait is because of different types of fragmentation in the structure of maritime trade. So every ship represents certain interests, the ship owner, the charterer, the cargo on board the ship. Those interests are completely fragmented, and they're very different to the interests of the other ship 100 miles away that is steaming to the same port at the same time, different ship owners, different charterers, different cargo. Of course, they can communicate. Technology allows them to communicate, but they have no relationship, no business, no contractual, no financial relationship to coordinate. No reason to coordinate. That's at sea. Now look at the land, look at ports and terminals. Every port is different around the world. Every port will have dozens or hundreds of terminals. Every terminal is different. For every port, for every terminal, you have a myriad of stakeholders, of actors, of contributors who affect the life of a port or a terminal. The easy ones, the port authorities, the harbor master, the tugs, the pilots, the storage facilities, customs, the trains, the land infrastructure, transportation infrastructure. Now, that ecosystem that is different in every single part of the world, that ecosystem is key to optimizing the berthing of ships. So to resolve sail fast and wait, you need to coordinate the multitude, the thousands of interests out at sea on board every ship, and the thousands of interests on land that are not coordinated today. You are very close to the container world, the liner world. The liner world is better coordinated because you have vertically integrated terminals and you have some vertically integrated shipping lines, but that is not perfectly organized, and that's an exception. For the majority of maritime trade, so dry bulk, tankers, general cargo ships, the lion's share of shipping doesn't have that integration, that vertical integration. So if you had an alien on his UFO land on planet Earth and look at how ships, cargo ships operate, the alien wouldn't understand this. Why on earth are you doing this? Why don't you just integrate everything and optimize everything? And if you did that, you would save 20%. This is the rough figure that people use, 20% of the fuel or the carbon footprint. Is that achievable? Is perfect just-in-time arrival? Is perfect integration? A little bit like a perfect air traffic control for the oceans. Is that possible? You asked earlier if I'm an optimist or a pessimist. You say, it's not possible. It will not happen. Not in my lifetime, maybe not in your lifetime, maybe not in the lifetime of any of our viewers and listeners. I don't regard it as feasible, not for lack of technology, but because of the way trading is structured. Looking at decarbonization, it is my firm belief that we will decarbonize or try to decarbonize the industry we have as it is structured, not some imaginary industry that has different features. So that is the reason we have this phenomenon. It's the fragmentation of the trade. Historically, it was the natural instinct. Historically, we didn't have the technology, but that doesn't exist anymore. That's not the reason anymore. Now it is simply and purely the structure of the trade. May I add one final thing, which is sometimes you see this problem described as low-hanging fruit in decarbonization terms. People say, well, the energy transition, ammonia, green ammonia, bio-LNG, these are really difficult things. But what about the low-hanging fruit, people say? Well, how about sail fast and wait? And every time I hear that, my heart sinks because it's really difficult. It is not a low-hanging fruit. This is really difficult. And one of the reasons, an additional reason that it is really difficult, is that sailing fast then waiting is in fact a very efficient way of doing things from the perspective of terminal operations. If you forget carbon, and forget utilization of the ship, and you forget financials of the ship, and you put yourself in the position of a terminal manager, all you want is to open up, to wake up in the morning, open your window, and see vessels wait. That's happiness. The definition of happiness is that you have many, many ships waiting, because then you have the resilience in your terminal operations. That's the system. So those who dream about just-in-time arrival as a low-hanging fruit, as something that is around the corner, I'm not one of them. I don't think it's possible. And for many stakeholders, many terminals, it's not even desirable. So the challenge is, how do we mitigate the effects of sail fast and wait, mitigate the carbon problem, while at the same time accepting that it is necessary, to the extent that it is necessary, it is useful for certain stakeholders. So again, it is about adapting, not changing. Just adapt.
No, I like this characterization a lot, because I think a lot of time when we look at digitization projects, you have similar thing, right? The technology exists already, but the main reason things doesn't change is because of incentive. So if the incentive for the folks is not to share the information, it doesn't matter how good the technology is, they'll find always a reason not to do it, right? Danger, impact operation, whatever. Fundamentally, you affect the on incentive. And as you said, right, I think the sell fast then wait is kind of a prisoner's dilemma. As long as you don't change the game, and you cannot change the game, then you just have to accept everybody behaving for their own self-interest will always reach to the same local optima. One thing you said that's super interesting, and I like to double click on that, is you say clearly you do not believe in just-in-time arrival because of the vested interest within the terminal. We also understand that for Blue Visby design, compared to just-in-time, berthing to berthing, that's not doable, but pilot station to pilot station, that's doable. Yeah. Why this small change will actually help solve this incentive problem?
Let me go a little bit deeper on the just-in-time. I don't want this to be misunderstood. It is perfectly possible to have a just-in-time vessel arrival system in a perfectly integrated supply chain. If it's a perfectly integrated supply chain, then it is possible. Whether it's desirable, I'm still doubtful, but it is possible. A second footnote just to this, and then I'll come back to the ports. In the years I've been studying and working on this problem, I discovered that even in systems optimization science, so there's an area of expertise called systems optimization. It's not my area of expertise, but I've read a bit about it. Even in that area, just in time in industrial processes is not seen as desirable because it lacks integrity, it lacks the resilience, the buffer. So it may be typical of the fixation about the past that we have in shipping, that we use a term just in time that is not really a modern approach. It was modern when Toyota started it 50 years ago. What is happening today in industrial optimization is not just in time. It's a concept which they call fluidity. It's the adaptation to changing circumstances. You need to have a system that can adapt. Just in time is rigid. So, close brackets about just in time. The Blue Visby solution has two main novelties. One is an attempt to overcome the prisoner's dilemma, split incentives. So there's a business and a contractual novelty on one hand, and then there is an operational novelty on the other. The operation novelty is to separate the ocean passage, the journey from pilot station to pilot station, from anchorage to anchorage, separate the ocean passage from berthing and approach berthing, meaning the short distance from the anchorage to the terminal, as a last mile problem. Last mile problems in optimization are sometimes insoluble. We cannot solve them. An analogy I use, and this may help to explain how Blue Visby is organized operationally. An example I use is, do you remember the good old days of the 2000s where we had cable line ships doing fiber optics around the world? Billions and billions and billions in fiber optics in the oceans. And you had super fast speeds with the fiber optics across the Pacific. And super fast speeds from land, where the fiber ended the land, until a position 100 miles inland. And then or to the end of your street, you have fiber, but from the end of your street to your flat, you have copper wires. That's a last mile problem. Can we fix that? Well, maybe not. But what we can fix is the Pacific Ocean fiber optic. So what we said with Blue Visby is this. We, and by we I mean the shipping community, we cannot solve ports. We have no tools, we have no power. It's a different universe. And unless you solve ports, and every port is different, you cannot solve berthing. So the operational novelty was to say, how about we only try to optimize the world beyond the ports, and then accept that if we optimize the arrival of ships at the anchorage, to the point of the anchorage, accept that from then on, we deliver the vessel in the hands of the ports and the terminals. If they have some type of optimization system, some type of just-in-time berthing from the anchorage to the terminal, fantastic. If they do not, well, we have at least delivered a benefit, even if we haven't solved the entire problem. And that's the operational novelty of Blue Visby. It is systemically optimizing the ocean passage, leaving berthing in the hands of the ports and terminals. The reason we did that was because we did not expect to be able to solve the ports. Now, what's the timescale? Because this all starts as a carbon project. We believed in timescale of now. We did not want a timescale measured in decades, by which time maybe you can solve some just-in-time. An additional benefit of that, and perhaps the most important structural business benefit of that, is that you can tell ports and terminals that Blue Visby does not interfere with your work, because we genuinely do not interfere. We do what we can in the oceans, we do what we can to a position off the anchorage, but then we don't interfere. That makes Blue Visby a very attractive system in the eyes of ports and terminals, precisely because we don't mess what they're trying to do. Many other initiatives over decades have been trying to persuade the ports and terminals to change the way they do things, right? And the resistance to change is not just about ships, it's about the terminals as well. And they don't change. Why should I change? I'm happy with what I have. So operationally, we optimize the ocean passage because it is not possible to coordinate the thousands of actors on land. It's not technically possible. It's not procedurally possible. It's not contractually possible. But it's also not desirable because they don't want to change the way they do things. Let them organize themselves. That's the operational novelty.
I guess I would also argue, as you say, if the KPI is the carbon, right? The pilot station to pilot station is probably the majority of the consumption anyway. If they stay there, the berthing from pilot station berthing, in terms of impact to carbon footprint, is also probably much smaller than the ocean passage. So if you can solve the ocean passage, you're solving the problem, even though not completely, according to the purists, right? You're not just in time, but you've actually made a meaningful improvement by making a small tweak to the problem you solved.
The data we have and the data scientists on the team have crunched the numbers over several years. We sit on what I think is the biggest data set ever analyzed, something like 500,000 of about 45,000 ships, a large part of the fleet over several years. And that in real operating conditions, so weather, currents, and so on. It has been simulated in two ways. One is using the Blue Visby approach, and one using classic, theoretically perfect, just-in-time algorithm. And the difference is, of course, it varies in different parts of the world, different segments, different ships, different times of year. But on average, the studies conclude that just-in-time, academically, theoretically perfect, delivers about 20% savings. The Blue Visby approach, which is the optimizing the ocean passage, delivers about 15%. So you leave 5 percentage points on the table for the last mile. And those ports that can do that, they get the full benefit. Those ports that cannot still get a very large benefit, even if it's not.
That makes sense. You shouldn't let the friction be the enemy of getting something done, right?
Hey, Zach in the editing room here. I realize that 76.8% of you have not yet subscribed to the Schelling Point. If you could just hit the subscribe button down below, it will really help us out and keep producing content like this. Thank you. Now back to the Schelling Point.
It's interesting because so you mentioned you have data scientists looking at this, right? So that's actually a question I have also from a algorithm perspective, right? Because I think the problem you're trying to solve is you have an algorithm to essentially calculate what is the optimal arrival time. And this optimal is actually balancing the competing interests of different vessels. So can you describe a bit more what is the principle of this algorithm? How do you ensure the fairness?
I will try my best as a non-expert.
I know you're a lawyer. Disclaimer, you're a lawyer.
I can describe the inputs because I understand that. What happens after that, I don't understand, and it's for other people to explain. So the inputs are the competing ships, because at any one time you have a number of ships steaming to the same destination, right? So you're not trying to optimize the world fleet. You're trying to optimize temporally a group. It may be 10, it may be 3, it may be 50. That requires that you put into your inputs the environmental conditions that affect the voyage of all of those ships that you're trying to optimize. You take into account the parameters of the ships, the specifications of the ships, not simply in terms of hydrodynamics, but also in terms of their constraints. So minimum load, engine load, simplistically minimum speed, in reality minimum RPM, minimum engine load, the environmental conditions, all of that for all the other ships. And then you also have to look at the ability of the terminal of destination to receive vessels from the anchorage. We call that the service ratio. So there may be reasons why the terminal, or let's say optimally, the terminal receives one vessel every 12 hours. We don't care about the turnaround time. We only care about the receipt from the anchorage, not cargo operations. So let's say optimal is every 12 hours. But then there is a tropical storm and they close the port. So instead of one every 12 hours, you get one every 36 hours. Or you may have a strike of the stevedores, or you may have a holiday, or you have a strike in the railways that affects the supply chain. So basically, the system detects constraints and takes them into account. Our system doesn't try to resolve the constraints. So it doesn't try to say, oh, well, how can we solve the strike or storage problem? We take it as it is. It is what it is. Or another, now there can be other constraints, other inputs that are for different segments, different target markets, different users. Another constraint that we use is, in certain segments, is the need to clean holds. So a bulk carrier that carries grain needs clean holds. If she was carrying coal on the voyage before, she will need more time to clean the holds. So that's a constraint. You don't want this ship to arrive just in time because she will not pass the inspection. There can be other cases where an additional constraint is a buffer that the terminal needs. It can be a buffer of number of hours that ships must wait for the authorities, for cleaning, for whatever reason, or can be a buffer measured in numbers of ships. I'm the harbor master at the port. I want to wake up in the morning and see 10 ships waiting. So that becomes a buffer because you have maybe it can be a regulation or some other reason why you need 10 ships waiting. You see, it's not just in time, but you reduce it to the point where it makes sense for everyone. The harbor master may accept that he doesn't need 10 ships waiting at any one time. Maybe he needs 3. So all of those constraints come in. There are additional constraints, inputs that go into the system that are contractual, that there may be a contractual reason for the vessel to arrive on a given date. That becomes a constraint. It is not a technological constraint. It is not an environmental constraint, as in the weather, but it is an equally important constraint. All of those constraints come in, or the inputs come in. The algorithm, the computer, the system, whatever you call it, the AI does what it does and pops, out pops a recommended arrival time.
And then I'm curious operationally. Let's say I'm the captain of a bulk shipper, right? And it's 10 days out. So you have the constraint. You give me an estimate. The Blue Visby solution is arrive at X dates. Now 1 day passes. Parameter has changed. Weather condition has changed. Is the algorithm run continuously, like once a day, updating?
Exactly.
Oh, okay.
Dynamic.
That is dynamic.
It's dynamic. So you can call it dynamic systemic optimization.
Wow, that's just really interesting. That's really interesting. So it takes into account the action of the other people as well. Oh, wow. Okay.
It has to be dynamic. Right? Yeah. It is constantly evolving.
Got it.
The system also has, there is a degree of foresight that a long passage may start 35 days out.
Yeah.
Right? There has to be a type of anticipation of what might happen, not on day 30, but on day 21. So what that might be is that other ships join the queue from other positions that are closer to the other port. So there is a degree of anticipation of what will happen in the future, and there is always a dynamic adjustment.
Now that's super interesting. It totally makes sense. It has to be dynamic. Now, that brings to my next question. How do you tie the contract together where you have so much complexity? Because now you suddenly have a bunch of constraints, change your behavior. At the end of the day, how do you balance interest? Like I have incentive to cheat. Maybe I don't follow exactly. How do I get penalized? So it feels like this design from legal aspect is very complicated.
Yeah, that's a part of it. Yes. So
can you give us a sense how legally you bind all those guys together?
So let's start from the ideal position and then move to what is achievable. And you see many friends of our project who are very, very, very supportive and sometimes say, well, this is fantastic. At which point will you leave it to the IMO? At which point will you do all of this work, but then get the regulator to impose it? Because in the minds of some people, Blue Visby is a system that can only work through regulation and imposition.
I guess from European Union, those people.
Many of them are, the expression, somebody is an armchair general. They never
Yes,
fought a
yes.
war. So the armchair generals would say, well, yeah, the IMO should do it. Well, answer, no, it won't, because it has no power to do it. But anyway, but that would be the ideal position, right? Where you have some sort of global police, global government, an omnipotent superpower of a regulator who imposes it. We can't do that. It's not a thing. Because remember, we're trying to do something that is achievable, not pretend that we can change the world. So what is that we can do? So we have to operate within the structure of the trade. That then requires that we go a little bit deeper into how the structure of the trade is organized, how the trade is organized. Well, first of all, how do we do it contractually? The contracts. We have to amend the contracts. Can we amend the contracts? Well, under English law, yes. You can agree whatever you like. That's a premise. Good. Which contracts? How do we do it? To answer those questions, you have to go a bit deeper into the types of organizing the ocean passage and the types of organizing arrival. I call that sometimes the interface between land and ocean. Because remember, we don't care about the land. We take the land as it is. We take the terminal as it is. But the interface, what is the interface? And there are three major types of land-ocean interface. One is the classic first-come, first-served interface. Complete jungle. Yeah, I want to overtake you, I want to kill you, you want to kill me, complete jungle. Believe it or not, that's the majority of the trade. Most ports around the world operate a first-come, first-served system. In fact, you can say it's not a system at all. It's a first-come, first-served jungle. Now, other terminals operate something that is sometimes called, and we call, terminal stem. So the terminal is an independent actor, and the terminal publishes a lineup, an expectation of arrival of the incoming ships, whether they are on a ballast voyage or a laden voyage, there is a lineup. In those cases, the terminal is independent of the users, and the terminal is used by many users. And then we have a different type of berthing system that we can call user stem, where one user operates their own terminal. Think of oil majors, they often have their own terminal. So it is their cargoes, their ships, or chartered by them who use the terminal. A variation to those is another system, an interface that we call port authority controlled berthing, where it's not first come, first served, it's not the terminal, it's not the user of the terminal, it is the port authority as an independent entity. The port authority tells terminals what to do, usually for safety. Of a port authority controlled berthing, we have two examples in the Blue Visby Consortium. One is the Port of Newcastle in Australia, or the Port Authority of New South Wales, Eastern Australia, that controls the Port of Newcastle, the largest coal exporting port in the world. They have a vessel arrival system, they call it a VAS, where the port authority commands, regulates who comes when. They have certain rules. The second example we have in the Blue Visby Consortium is technically not a port, but behaves like a port, Panama Canal. The Panama Canal Authority are Blue Visby Consortium member. The Panama Canal Authority, if you imagine them as a port, they're not a port, but if you imagine them as an authority, they regulate port entry. They have rules. So for different interfaces, we need to make different adaptations to contract. If we're looking at a terminal stem interface, and that is the version of the Blue Visby solution that has been deployed. So the Blue Visby system is working today as we speak in a handful of Australian ports that are grain importing ports, grain exporting ports. And what they have in common is that they are all terminal stem. So the terminal issues a lineup, regulates port entry. So what contracts do we adapt for that? We have amendments to the charter parties between owners and charter for the ships that use that terminal. We take as a constraint the lineup of the terminal. We take it as it is. We don't try to improve it. It is what it is. And we organize the arriving ships by reference to the expectation of the terminal. If it's a user stem, it will look exactly the same. Legally, we would change the same contracts. If it is a port authority controlled berthing, it will look very similar, not exactly the same. Where it looks different is the first come, first served model. Yeah. Because there you have no constraint that is given to you by the receiving terminal.
Can I interrupt you just a moment? I just want to confirm one thing, because otherwise I'm going to forget this thought process. Is my understanding correct that in the case, let's say, of terminal stem or a user stem, right, one extra input that go into algorithm is the lineup is predetermined. Therefore, it's 1 degree of freedom less for you to optimize for. You know already this is the lineup. Then you need to say, given this lineup that's predetermined by somebody else, which we are not in control of, I'm going to disseminate order or arrival to you so that it matches this order and we minimize the carbon footprint. And that is why this can work very nicely. Is that correct?
Almost correct. So yes, it is a constraint, but it is not set in stone. It's a dynamic constraint because the terminal changes.
Yep.
So a terminal lineup will start life with a range. So I want these 25 ships, and the ones that are further out into the future, I just want them within a range that will be narrowed down later. Some vessels on a lineup may disappear because they felt the contract fell through, the deal was broken, and the ship is not coming. So it is not as simple as saying you follow a list that is always the same. It's still dynamic.
Understand.
The second reason why it's not exactly set in stone is that the terminal only care about berthing. So the terminal gives you a berthing window or a berthing date. The terminal doesn't tell you what may happen with the tides in the channel between the anchor and the berth. The terminal doesn't know if the ship is clean or dirty and whether she will need to spend 3 days cleaning the holds or 5 days cleaning the holds. So the lineup is an end date that is always fluctuating a little bit and requires more optimization, if you like.
Yep. But I guess, as I said, it's better than the first come, first serve, because this one, at least this authority tells you this is the thing. It may change, right? You may have to adapt, but you have a first degree of freedom that's kind of removed.
Yes, absolutely. And there is also a benefit, a contractual benefit, which is that you have certain rules. Even if you arrive 10 days earlier, you just sit there and wait. In the jungle of first come, first serve, right? Then you have how do you do this? It's not enough to organize a particular ship owner and a particular charterer under the charter party. You also need to do a massive jump in contractual terms and find a way to organize one ship with another ship, which is anathema. It is not a thing. It doesn't happen today, ever. We have a term for that. We call it parallel fragmentation. The ships steam in parallel, but have no communication. They have no way of coordinating between them or amongst them if you have 50 ships. So how do you do that? We have no doubt in our project, and I haven't read anything different, that this is a problem that has to be fixed if you're ever going to crack the first come, first served problem. You need some way to coordinate a group of ships amongst them, a system. Now, the armchair generals will say, well, the port can do that. But in reality, no port has a horizon, operational or financial or any other horizon beyond the anchorage. The port of Newcastle in Australia, our good consortium member, have a horizon that is longer, 6 days out, for reasons we can come to later, but they're an exception. The vast majority of ports around the world ends at the anchorage. So the hope that somehow ports will coordinate ocean traffic, not a thing. So how do we do this then? We need to find a way to coordinate and systemically organize the incoming ships. We know we have the technology. We have it. I described it. We can't have a rule. We can't have a super regulator. We don't have a world police. We don't have ports. So how do we do it? English law, contract. Can we amend existing contracts to deliver this? What are the existing contracts? Charter parties, bills of lading. What do they have in common? They're all bilateral. But this is not a bilateral problem. It's a systemic issue. It's multilateral. So back at the concept phase of Blue Visby, you scratch your head and you think, all right, I can identify the problem. As a good engineer, I have identified the problem. Can I think of any precedent, any example where the competing ships, competitors, ship owners who compete with each other, charterers who compete with each other, can I think of any example where those people get together to achieve a common aim in business, not in fantasy world? And the answer which if you think about it becomes obvious if you understand shipping a little bit more than the surface. The answer is the mutuality of P&I. A protection and indemnity insurer, we call them P&I clubs, is a mutual insurer. What does that mean? You have a group of ship owners who join a group to achieve one aim. What is that aim? Mutual insurance. How do they achieve that? Contractually. So they set up a group that has rules. We call them P&I rules. Sometimes for non-shipping people, I describe it a little bit like a health club. There's a health club and there's a swimming pool, and you want to use a swimming pool. Well, you have to follow the rule. You pay your fee and you follow the rules. So what is the sail fast and wait in a first come, first served environment? What is that? It is a systemic problem or a systemic need that requires collective, requires a group, requires an association, and I use the term loosely, with rules. What are those rules? You don't jump the queue. There's one rule. You don't jump the queue. Yeah? That you have a system that gives you a queue number, and you follow that rule, and if you follow that rule, you will benefit and everybody else will benefit. So there's a prisoner's dilemma answer, right? That you introduce a solution that you benefit from, the others benefit from. Your incentive to use it is not the environment. The incentive to use it is a financial benefit, a financial saving, a financial benefit.
The financial benefit is you don't have to sail as fast to catch up. You can sail the normal speed and you won't miss your queue. That's the financial benefit, right?
That's right. So the financial benefit for the ship owner, well, now we get deeper into a split incentives, right? Yeah. That what is the broad benefit? You save fuel. Who benefits from saving fuel is more difficult.
Yes.
Because it depends on whether it's a time charter or a voyage charter. But at the horizontal level, at the level of the competing ships, if you look at the one ship as one interest, all competing ships benefit. What does that require then? To recap, it requires, and I use the word loosely, an association. Can we do that? Of course we can. We've been doing it for 100 years with P&I clubs. Will people do that? Well, yes. If they benefit, there has to be a financial benefit. If you deliver the financial benefit to each participant, all of a sudden you deliver a 20% or 15% or 10% or whatever it is reduction in emissions. And you deliver that today with today's infrastructure. You deliver that with a structure of the trade as it is today, not with some imaginary future state that may or may not exist. So that's how you solve first come, first served. The Blue Visby solution has been deployed in a terminal STEM use case. It has not been deployed in a first come, first served use case. We're still working on this. There are pilots and trials. Yep. That is still in development, but we believe, and I don't think anyone else has come up with anything better, we believe we know how to solve it. Yep. And we have tested the parameters, the components.
That's super interesting. Yeah, that gives me a lot of food for thought because I agree 100%. I think it's like if you don't have a reservation system to go to a restaurant, everybody has to rush a restaurant to get a seat. Yes. And what we're saying is if you put the rules, everyone benefits. You don't have to queue up to eat. You just can trust the waiting system and it will work.
Yes. And that waiting system is not the restaurant system.
Yes, exactly. It's probably somebody else. Yes, correct. Because the restaurant doesn't want to handle this.
Yes.
Now, if I double click what you just said about solving the problem of first come, first serve needs a creation of an association. And I think right now the consortium, I think, has 40 members. Right? So then effectively you had to extend way bigger the association because the bulk shipping is such a fragmented market. I think this is something that I have personal experience because of consortium. Like, how do you, what's your view of consortium? I have my personal view, but how do you approach the designing or creating a consortium? Because that's a tall order, in my opinion.
We have this in common, Bertrand. So they're wrangling with different people or different interests and so on. But before I answer, may I just clarify that the Blue Visby Consortium is not the association to solve first come, first served.
Sure.
So what I described, the association, or you can also call it a multilateral contract as opposed to a bilateral contract. A multilateral contract is what is needed. That doesn't have to be the Blue Visby Consortium as it is today.
I see.
Yeah. So, and it's not as difficult as it sounds, because all you want is a multilateral contract amongst more than 2 or more than 3 or more than 4.
Got it. I understand.
Yeah.
It's almost
at
like
a given
the
time.
rule book for bill of lading for EBL.
Yes.
Basically the same idea.
You just want that to be triggered at a particular point in time.
Correct.
So that when the ships are steaming,
Yeah.
right, you have 10 ships steaming at the same time to the same place. If out of the 10 ships you have 5 playing by the rules, you can deliver a benefit. It will not be perfect, because you will still have to look over your shoulder to make sure nobody's overtaking you. Yeah? That you have no pirates trying to overtake. So it's not as idealistic as saying the entirety of the world's bulk fleet must take part.
No.
You know, it's a much narrower.
And I think also the contract is probably not as hard as to design as one would think, because the risks are symmetric, right?
Yes.
In the sense that sometimes you are in this position where if you raise potential benefits, but sometimes you are the I want to protect myself, because for every single situation, scenario can happen, which means that the terms in the contract, the rule book, should be symmetric, easier to accept.
That's an extremely important point you just made, because yes, it is not very complex in terms of terms, because it has to be minimalistic. It's only the absolute minimum. But over time, a participant will occupy different positions.
Yes.
So over time, the benefit is bigger than just the one voyage.
Yeah, absolutely. I think another thing you said I really liked when we prepare for the call is you say that the age of decarbonization, innocence is over. Now it's all about the money.
And I said that even before Donald Trump, the latest.
Oh, yeah. The latest thing, it's about
yeah,
the
so
money.
we are recording this in the middle of August. We had a conversation. Well, a few days ago, the US administration announced that it's against the IMO Net Zero framework. And as I understand it, it has been said that countries that follow or adopt or ratify or somehow support the IMO framework will be penalized perhaps by the American administration. And Bertrand and I had a discussion about the age of innocence, but that was before the American developments. Yeah.
So now I'm curious. I think you kind of hinted at already, right? Which is going forward, it's fundamentally not about pilot and testing things just in theory. It's all about P&L and hard dollars who will dictate the actions, right? So how does that inform the design for Blue Visby? What's the biggest impact it has on Blue Visby design?
So we discussed the need for a multilateral contract for the first come, first served use case. Let's put that to one side, because that is simply a design question to incentivize participation and deliver a benefit to the stakeholders, an absolute benefit, a fuel saving. We then need to address the fact that that fuel saving goes into the pocket of somebody and not somebody else. So fundamental to the problem, to the challenge of sail fast and wait, is that the practice is profitable for some people and unprofitable for others. So, and that needs a little bit of explanation. In a time charter party, we have 2 broad types of charter party, time charter and voyage charter. In a time charter, it's the charterer who pays for the fuel. So the ship owner doesn't care. That sounds a bit extraordinary to somebody who's not in shipping, to think that actually ship owners may not care about fuels. But half the world's fleet is sailing around the world on time charters, which is the charterer's job then to fuel the ship and pay for the fuel. The reverse, in a voyage charter party, it is the ship owner who pays for the fuel. And in a voyage charter party, the charterer pays a lump sum freight, an amount of money, regardless of how long the voyage will take and regardless of how expensive it will be in terms of fuel. And in a voyage charter party, we have a system, a universal system that we call laytime and demurrage, a legal system, a contractual system that says that after the vessel has arrived at a predetermined place, the ship owner has done what he promised to do. He earns the freight, and if more waiting time is necessitated because of congestion, because of slow cargo operations, for whatever reason, then the ship owner should be paid extra. We call that demurrage. Sometimes I describe it. It's a little bit like ordering a taxi to pick you up from the airport. The flight is delayed. And yes, you promised a quote, you accepted the price of £50. But if the taxi driver is waiting for 3 hours, he will get more money. He doesn't take the risk of that. You, the passenger, take the risk of that. It's a bit the same with voyage charters. What this means then is that if we do what we say, if Blue Visby delivers the operational benefit that I described, because what does Blue Visby do? Blue Visby delays the arrival of the ship at the anchorage. It doesn't delay berthing. The vessel will berth at exactly the same time, but we delay the vessel's arrival at the anchorage. That means, and through that we achieve a fuel saving. In a time charter, the charterer will pocket all the money. In a voyage charter, the ship owner will pocket all the money, all the saving, but the flip side is that he may miss out on the opportunity of earning that special compensation that we call demurrage for every day of waiting. So you see, on either case, a classic definition of a split incentives problem. Owners and charterers, any rational economic actor will not do something unless they benefit financially. So if we do a Blue Visby voyage and we let the saving rest where it falls, nobody will do it, because half the stakeholders will have no financial reason to do it. Therefore, having identified the problem, like good engineers, we need to fix it. How do we fix it? Can we think of any example where owners and charterers in a highly competitive, highly antagonistic industry, that's shipping, maritime trade, can we think of any example where the owners and the charterers put aside their differences to achieve something that they have a common interest in? Because ordinarily, an owner's benefit is a charterer's loss. This is a zero-sum game. So at the concept stage of Blue Visby, you think hard and you think, having identified the problem, and I would call it split incentives, how do I resolve split incentives? How can I give everybody skin in the game? Because we start from the premise that people will not change. We will not deliver this by saying to owners and charterers, no, play nicely together. They will not play nicely together. They have to have a reason to do it. And the example, the precedent, is general average. General average is an ancient, literally ancient, it was developed first by the ancient Greeks, believe it or not. General average is an ancient system that seeks to share the losses, the financial consequence, the financial sacrifice of something going wrong with the ship. Going a little bit deeper, think of an example. A vessel has caught fire in the middle of the Pacific, and to put out the fire, the captain has to flood hole number 1. So the cargo owners of the cargo in hole number 1 sacrifice their financial interest for the common good, to use legal terms, to save the common maritime adventure. These are legal terms. See, the law can be poetic. To save the common maritime adventure, the owners of the cargo in hole number 1 have sacrificed. General average is a system that says the money that those cargo owners sacrificed will be shared by everybody. Everybody will contribute. That became an inspiration for a methodology that we call BlueGA, which is a methodology for, number 1, identifying and quantifying the financial benefit of operating a Blue Visby system, and number 2, sharing that financial benefit between the stakeholders, owners and charterers. By doing that, we give owners and charterers skin in the game. We are able to tell them, do a Blue Visby voyage and you will make money. Even if, as a time charter owner, you don't pay for the fuel. So it's about giving financial incentives, enable the Blue Visby voyage, which in turn reduces fuel, which in turn reduces carbon. But we don't say to people, put aside your differences and do this to save the planet. We say to people, keep your differences, by all means kill each other, but for this one, do something together and you will both make money. That is the basic feature of what we call BlueGA.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I think you explained really well. Essentially, 2 mechanisms, right? If I recall, the first one is a multi-party contract, like the GA. It all stems. It feels like everything comes from insurance. So indeed, they had to solve this hard problem from hundreds of years ago. You know, it works. It's proven. You adapt to this, and I agree with you. That's probably the only way to bind people in a opposite side of a trade to work together to solve this problem, right? So
there are many analogies. There are many analogies with your work with electronic bills. So with electronic bills, you also need to overcome a basic reluctance.
Yeah.
Right?
So okay, so
there has to be
that
skin
wasn't
in
the
the game.
theme. That wasn't the theme here. But that's also the direction we're thinking, right? Which is a lot of people keep saying Hyper is bad, right? But actually, it has been working for hundreds of years. Why change, right? So there's a lot of things that push back. Me, the way I think about it is there are certain things only electronic beta can do that paper cannot do. So you have to focus on those use cases, not saying replacing paper for the sake of replacing paper. But as you said, I think that's something that really inspires how we're thinking about it is if you adopt electronic beta of lading, some value will be created. It's very important that whatever the value created is spread out. Everyone needs to get some of it. Because if you don't get the value, then as you said, why should I do this? I do not care about digitization of trade. I do not care about decarbonization. At the end of the day, we're here to do a business transaction. You cannot make me care about those things unless you give me a financial incentive. And that's absolutely correct.
And this is also counterintuitive, because if you are a business guy, whether it's a startup or a mature business, it's counterintuitive to think about sharing.
Yeah. I want to capture the full upside. Why should I give it to you? That's actually so true. There's another debate we have for electronic beta. Let me share quickly. There's one shipping line that say if we use EBL, the EBL is so much better than paper. So with this logic, right, then the EBL I should charge $50 per EBL because the experience is so much better. And I flipped that to them. It's like, wait, hold on a sec. Do you think in 1999 when Sergey Brin and Larry Page, they invented Google and they say, search is so much better than Alta Vista or Yahoo search. I'm going to charge $50. Do you think you can build Google as it is as a business? Or it was more optimal to give it for free and try to figure out a way to make money that helps the user, but also creates value for user, creates value for you? It's better to innovate in the business model rather than say, I'm going to charge you. And so, no, we're 100% on. I think that really echoes for what we're thinking also. So there's another question I want to ask. I think we hitched on this factor, which is first come, first serve is really difficult. I think the terminal, I think what you call it, the terminal stem and then the user stem, this is easier to adapt. But the first come, first serve is really difficult. And I know that one of the members of the consortium, Marubeni, tested Blue Visby in the first come, first serve environment. So what are the learning that you can share a bit on that pilot?
Yeah. So that was let me put this in context. So the trajectory of Blue Visby starts with concepts and academic studies. Then it goes to hindcast, so simulations of the past or data sets. All of that is in the past and academic. Comes a point where we need to study something and to simulate something in the present, in real time. And for that, we do a digital twin trial, or we call them digital twin virtual pilots, where we simulate the behavior of ships and voyages in real time, but not in real life. Because real life is harder for contracts and for financial reasons. After the digital twin virtual pilot schemes, or many campaigns that we've had, we move to prototype trials. Prototype trials involve real ships, real voyages, real time, real life. So real risks for those who try it. We have gone through the entire journey for all the use cases, whether it's terminal stem or user stem or port authority or first come, first served. We've done the studies, the hindcast, the digital twins. And so the prototype trials is the final stage. Yep. You could say it's the final stage of R&D. So Marubeni, our good consortium member, and the Blue Visby team worked for a long time, many months. The simulations were the digital twin pilot, all done. To apply that in a real life environment involving chemical tankers that were going to different ports in Asia, but different ports that were all first come, first served. And they were testing variations of the algorithm for a number of ships, dozens of ships, of the chartered fleet. So Marubeni are the charterers, not the ship owners. And they were testing the variations to see what is the benefit in different circumstances. A lot depended on the structure of the trade. So if did you have 20 ships steaming to the same port at the same time? Did you have 5? Where they were coming from? Because it was Asian trade, many of the ships that were going to the same berth or the same terminal were Chinese coastal traders, coastal small ships. And we discovered that some of them the AIS is not as reliable as with other ships. So there were many learnings around the reliability of what perhaps I would have thought was entirely reliable AIS. And it was a testing environment. But it was done with real ships that were chartered by Marubeni. Marubeni, during the trial, retained full control to engage or disengage. So they were not running the Blue Visby system for the entire voyage. They were using it, I think they used the expression that they used it as a decision support tool. So at any one time, there was a digital twin of the vessel running Blue Visby. The Marubeni operators were monitoring it. If they liked what they saw, they would tell the captain to do the same. Or they stopped, or they started again. There was a lot of stop-start, which explains why, if you see the press release on the Marubeni trials, the range of fuel savings was very broad, because sometimes you had a good result over several days. Some days you had a worse result and the trial was interrupted and the ship went back to business as usual. There's a wider lesson for this. You also see that sometimes with our deployed system in Australia, there's a lot of variation in the results. When you look at studies and hindcasts and you take averages, that's not a good guide. An average is an average. Real world is not an average. So there's a variation. There's the uncertainty. But the fundamental point is that despite uncertainty, despite variation, there is a benefit. Yep. It may be a small benefit. So in financial terms, operating the BlueGA system, and the parameters there are how much fuel, how expensive is the fuel, and what is the cost of a day's waiting, or the demurrage rate. You have to take that into account. So the parameters fluctuate, financial parameters fluctuate, but your BlueGA, the financial benefit of Blue Visby, could be $5,000 on the voyage, or it could be $65,000 on the voyage. And you don't know that from the beginning. So if you look at the business side of a chartering manager who decides whether or not to do a Blue Visby voyage, he may get a 5,000 benefit or a 50,000 benefit.
Yeah.
But no matter what, he will get a benefit and a fuel benefit, or a carbon, or, the carbon benefit is for everybody.
It almost feels like later on, sometimes the captain, they have to assess the weather pattern. Now it almost feels like you have the Blue Visby plan. Do I trust the plan or do I don't trust the plan? And my skill as a captain is to, based on my experience and my navigation, to select or not select. That's actually a new skill set potentially for the ship captain, right? And they shouldn't be just relying blindly. Sorry?
You're very right, but we're trying to neutralize that because our operations only give the captain a date. We call it the RTA, a recommended time of arrival.
Oh, I see.
We give the captain an RTA. How he gets there,
that's his problem.
It's his job. He's the master of the ship.
Yep.
So Blue Visby does not do weather routing or voyage planning.
I see what you're
saying. There
saying.
are many good companies out there who are experts in helping the captain navigate. Avoid this storm, avoid that storm, take this current, that current, right? Very sophisticated voyage planning tools. Blue Visby does not do that.
That's super interesting. Looking ahead, right? So right now, I think we talk about most of the rollout the pilot has been in Australia and then in cheaper moving grain. How do you see the commercial route globally from early adopter to wider spread adoption?
That's something that I learned during this voyage, this journey. When this all started and we were looking at beyond concepts and the pilots and the data, I didn't expect grains and dry bulk to be the first adopter. I didn't expect that. Because the data didn't suggest.
First adopter?
Well, if you look at the data, the biggest opportunity is in certain parts of the tanker sector, certain parts of it, and in the large Cape-size sector, so mainly the ships that carry iron ore. But that didn't happen. There are other challenges with those segments. The interest came from different sources. That's another fallacy, perhaps. We think of familiar household names in an industry, shipping or any other industry. And you think, they must be, they're so vocal, they must be an early adopter. They must be a first mover. But real life shows us that sometimes first movers are people you've never thought of. It could be something as simple as a group of individuals in a handful of companies that have a KPI, a personal KPI, to address this or that challenge. And they say, well, I have my challenge and Blue Visby helps with my challenge. And I'll do it. Data would tell us that there's a lot of potential with grains, mainly because congestion is seasonal, right? That's an interesting one. in container trades or perhaps vehicle carriers or oil or maybe iron ore, there's very little seasonality. The production and the raw materials flow in the same way. With grains, you have harvest. So you may have a very efficient port that becomes extremely inefficient for 1 month in the year. A huge bottleneck, right?
I see.
So, and the data may not show that, because you should look at the average and you think, well, the average is good.
Doesn't show the extreme, yeah.
Or if you look at Panama Canal is super efficient, but there are pockets of inefficiency that we're working with in a pilot environment. So what's the future? I expect more and more ports in pockets around the world. So Australia is one pocket. There can be there is a lot of interest in some European ports as ports of destination. Some of it will be linked to the policy environment. So it is a fact that if you have a European port involved, or a voyage to or from the European port, it is a fact that it's more valuable in money terms, because of fuel EU, fuel EU. With the IMO, let's see what happens. Anything can happen. It will become more valuable in certain trades. I said at the start of our discussion that maritime trade is fragmented. This fragmentation is a feature. We cannot just wish it away. Fragmentation will be a fact also in decarbonization. We should stop imagining a world where everything is uniform and perfect and perfectly formed, and these things don't exist in real life. It's fragmented. In that fragmented world, there will be pockets where Blue Visby is deployed faster. Other pockets where it's not. But Blue Visby has this unique feature, I think, that has been designed for every use case. And for that reason, there will be network effects. So once you have used Blue Visby in port A, it's very easy
for B and C to adapt it also.
By contrast, if you were building a system that is perfectly adapted to one terminal, well, your world is limited to that terminal. Then you have to start again. You see, it goes back to the beauty of optimizing the ocean passage and the commonality of the ocean passage. And you don't try to create bespoke special systems for 1,000 terminals in hundreds of ports.
No, I really like the way you think about it, because it almost feels like the BlueGA, the contractual agreement, it will also spread out from a network effect perspective, right? Because if someone sign on to this, the N+1 benefit from the network. Anyone you add would increase the value of the network. And then your value to the terminal will also be much bigger, because the terminal say, hey, there's only 40 odd lots people who are doing this. I don't care. Suddenly, if the network is much, much bigger, all those shipper cares. They may not all hit my terminal, but big portion of people hit my photo this, then I have to take it seriously. And that's super interesting.
Exactly. In fact, there's been a mathematical study. One of the data scientists on the team, she prepared her master's thesis on the network effects of Blue Visby in terms of mathematics. She was modeling what happens in a first come, first served environment if you only have 5 out of 50 ships. What happens if you have 7 out of 50? What happens if you have 10 out of 50? You still have benefits, but you have lower benefits. You have to make sure that you're not overtaken. So that network effect that you very correctly defined has been modeled. It is it's a number. For every one member in a first come, first served environment, there is a specific decimal percentage improvement.
I can imagine the curve. I can see the curve in my head already. It's probably something like this, where it starts to go up. At some point, the less valuable, because above certain threshold, it's 60-70% of people using Blue Visby, the additional one is less impactful because most people actually already follow the rules. No, it's quite interesting. I'm curious to see the paper, because that's actually really interesting to think about the adoption. Okay, so I think we'll talk about Blue Visby at length. You not only doing Blue Visby, you're also, I think, the chair of Comité Maritime International for the Decarbonization group. Can you share a bit more? What are the work you're doing in that specific function?
Yeah, so I'm involved in many, many projects. These are high profile, but as a lawyer, I do many other decarb-related projects for a large number of companies and institutions. CMI is it's one of those unknown in shipping. CMI is an association of maritime law association. And it's the CMI who is responsible. It's the CMI who created pretty much all the international treaties that maritime trade relies on. CMI is more than 100 years old. CMI predates the IMO. It was set up in Antwerp in 1897. Why? You had cargo ships, commercial business, all around the world. Back then, there was not even a desire to create a regulator, right? It was not, it was just empires. But the maritime world recognized that it needed some rules. They had contracts, but they needed some rules. So the world's maritime law associations got together and created an association of associations, the CMI. And it said, okay, you guys, now let's get together to solve our clients' problems through creating treaties, international agreements. And it was the CMI who created things like liability conventions, things like the York-Antwerp rules, for example, for general average, conventions for the sale of ships, conventions for the arrest of ships. So pretty much everything that is in the international domain as international treaties is the work of the CMI. The CMI stopped being the number one, the go-to place for international treaties in maritime, when in around 1955, the IMO set up a legal committee. So it was, and since then, it is the IMO legal committee that often works with the CMI and looks at the need for international treaty. But not always the IMO. The CMI very recently, in the last 10 years, produced an international treaty for the judicial sale of ships, for example. 3 years ago, nearly 3 years ago now, the British Maritime Law Association suggested to the CMI that the CMI sets up a decarbonization working group, international working group, with me as chair. The CMI accepted the idea, the proposal, and we are now in an international working group with about 25 lawyers from around the world. We organize our work in 3 work streams. There may be more in the future. One work stream is what we call green contract, an inquiry into how internationally, not just English law, but internationally, maritime contracts can or should or may be amended to respond, to adapt, to respond to the decarbonization challenge. That's green contracts. We have a work stream that we call green ships, which was a very specific and narrow mandate, which was this. We as lawyers, we said, okay, guys, everybody now is talking about zero-ready ships, ammonia-ready, methanol-ready. And lawyers are difficult people. We all say, well, what does that mean? What does that mean? What does it mean? Ammonia-ready. And if you scratch the surface, you will see that in shipbuilding contracts, in charter parties, when people talk about something ready, ammonia-ready, they can mean a whole spectrum of things, from leaving a void space in a new building to install in the future a special fuel tank, down to having a fully functioning main engine and fully functioning supply chain, supply lines, and all of that, right? Can you imagine the difference between the two? So we work together with Lloyd's Register Foundation to devise, to develop a grid, a readiness grid, a zero readiness spectrum, yeah? So we can define technically and contractually what different states of readiness mean. So that when you order a ship, when you build a ship, when you charter a ship, you can look at the grid, at the list and say, I want a ship that is L number 3 or B number 2. So that's what we did, and we published that work last summer. The last work stream, and perhaps the most impactful, is we call green fuels, with again a very narrow mandate. And the mandate was the mandate we gave ourselves. We decide what to do because we're independent, right? I didn't say that at the beginning, but that's important. The CMI is independent of everyone. Nobody tells the CMI what to do. We act in our best, in good faith, on the best professional view that we have about something. We do not represent a client or a government or anything like that. That's what makes the CMI unique in that sense. Imagine that you have a group of professionals, a group of experts that are only guided by their expertise, not by the interests of clients, of governments, of associations, and so on. So we put ourselves a mandate, a task to look at the civil liability and compensation regime that would apply to non-hydrocarbon fuels. We have a very well-developed liability and compensation regime for fuel oil and for oil carried as cargo. Why do we have that? In response to the big marine casualties, to the big pollution incidents of the 1950s and 60s. Before 1950, there was no liability and compensation regime for oil pollution. The international community, at that point, discovered that we need to do something because this is crazy, this is really bad. And it took about 15 years to create a regime. That regime is 2, 3, or 4, depending on how you count, international treaties that govern the liability for fuel as cargo, hydrocarbons as cargo, and hydrocarbons as fuel. Different regimes. Now, think alternative fuels. Green ammonia, not a hydrocarbon. Green methanol, not a hydrocarbon. Biofuels, not a hydrocarbon. Bio-LNG, not a hydrocarbon. One other definition of hydrocarbons in the conventions, in the treaties, is persistent oil. It's a cleanup regime for persistent oil. So our conclusion then was, which we published a year ago and reviewed again this summer, that we believe, in our professional judgment, that there is a lacuna, there is a gap, that the present compensation and liability regime does not sufficiently cover alternative fuels. Option 1, we do nothing. We leave it as it is. So we wait, like we did in the 1950s. We wait for the casualties. We wait for the accidents to happen. And then we try to do something. That's option number 1. Inactivity is an option. Option number 2, do something. What is that? It can be an amendment to one or more of the conventions that we have. It can be a new convention. We submitted our work last March to the IMO. And in March, the IMO endorsed the work of the CMI and agreed to create they call it a work product, to create the structure, to investigate and propose solutions. Propose solutions now to the IMO members, to the member states. The CMI works independently of the member states. So participate in that work of the IMO, obviously. We support, we participate, but we're able to go faster. If in our professional judgment, we should go faster. Now, it is my view, and that is a personal view. I don't represent anybody. I don't act for a client on this. My professional view is that creating an effective liability and compensation regime for alternative fuels is absolutely vital. We cannot wait for the problems to manifest themselves and then start, because it will take a long time. And it's not just the time it will take, it's also that the international community will not forgive the maritime industry.
Yes.
Having done all of that in terms of all of the effort, all of the work for alternative fuels, but turned a blind eye
on the risk,
compensation and liability. I think it would be inexcusable.
Yeah.
It will take its course. It will take as long as it takes because it involves government. No matter what the CMI says, even if we produced an international treaty, a draft tomorrow, it will have to be discussed. But at least the work has started, and I'm very proud of that because any lawyer would accept that this is necessary. And it has frustrated me for a long time that the decarbonization discourse often simply disregard legal issues, legal challenges. It's almost as if people expect that it will take care of itself. Say, no, it won't take care of itself. It's not less important than engineering. No,
I agree.
It is less important than engineering.
No. Actually, I don't agree with that. I think, there's a joke people make right now about US and China, right? And they're saying US is a country governed by lawyers and China is by engineers. Actually, personally, I think you need both. You need both engineers to make new development. You also need lawyers to create clear rules so that incentives are fully aligned. We don't have this uncertainty. If you want to achieve something, you need clear rule, understanding of risk, how to share the risk. And
that's business, right?
So you need both lawyers and engineers, I guess.
And business cannot operate without, we're not doing it for the sake of it. It's the certainty needed for business to operate. Without business, nothing happens. Decarbonization is a business. It will be business that will deliver it. It's not science.
And then the solution is there. Meaning, it's not you have to invent new technology. Doesn't exist. Technology is there. Is more spending the money, allocating it, and doing it than saying we have to create something completely new. Yeah. Thanks, Harris. So hopefully you had a good time chatting with us and sharing the progress that you've made on Blue Visby. And to us, really fascinating to understand how the legal framework can affect change. So do you have any other guests that you think can potentially add value to this podcast? And also, if you want to invite them, why? What's the reason?
Yeah, I gave some thought to this and I came up with one name. It's Christopher Rex, who is based in Copenhagen and is an economist with a Danish ship finance, a ship finance bank. He is the author or the editor of a very important publication. I think it's called the Maritime Review or the Shipping Review that they put out once a quarter. Christopher is a deep thinker, but he's a business guy. And it goes back to our discussion at the start that we need to look at how things can be made to work. And at the same time, that could be a good discussion to ask him is can we decide what doesn't work and move on? So let's stop talking about things that do not work and focus on the things that work or we think might.
I think that's the famous aphorism by Charlie Munger, right? To invert. So he's not trying to show something, so you know what not to do. Not doing this actually is good. So having that actually is solving the problem also.
Yes. Well, there you go. I didn't know it was Munger's quote. I should remember that.
Yeah. Thanks a lot so much for your time, Harris, tonight. Thanks again for joining us today on The Schelling Point. Hopefully you'll like the episode. Please comment, like, share, and subscribe. Until next time at The Schelling Point, where ideas will meet again.